In the luxurious conference room of a major law firm in Chicago, 11 lawyers were arguing fiercely over a contract clause that could cost the company millions of dollars. No one could find a way out, and the tension was unbearable. Then a black cleaning lady quietly walked in and pointed out the mistake they had missed for hours. In just 2 minutes, she solved the problem that left the entire room speechless. What she didn't know was that her action had caught the CEO's attention, and it would change her life forever. Before we go back, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe because tomorrow I've got something extra special for you. The air in the opulent conference room of Sterling & Brooks, a venerable law firm in the heart of Chicago, was thick with palpable tension. Arthur Sterling, the firm's sharp and serious chief executive officer, pressed his fingers to his forehead. His gray eyes narrowed in deep frustration. 11 highly paid lawyers, graduates of prestigious institutions like Harvard, Yale, and Columbia, were talking over each other, blaming one another, quoting legal precedents, and contradicting themselves under immense pressure. Their collective brilliance, honed in the hallowed halls of academia, seemed to have failed them. The entire crisis revolved around Clause 38B in a crucial contract with the formidable Renshaw Group. If the firm's legal team couldn't unearth a loophole, the company faced not only the loss of millions of dollars, but more crucially, the erosion of the market's trust, a commodity Arthur valued above all else. "This is a legal bomb," one lawyer declared, his voice strained. "The clause is locked. There's no way around it." Arthur sighed a sound of deep disappointment. "And to think you study at Harvard, Yale, and Columbia just to come here with nothing." Unnoticed amidst the legal maelstrom, Eleanor Vance, a quiet African-American woman, moved gracefully through the back of the room. She was pushing her cleaning cart, her faded t-shirt depicting a beloved cartoon cat, a stark contrast to the tailored suits around her, signaling she hadn't anticipated being there at such an hour. As she knelt to meticulously clean a small, barely visible puddle in the corner, chaos erupted overhead. Eleanor's eyes, pretending not to notice, subtly drifted to the whiteboard where the contentious clause was written out, surrounded by frantic notes. "That doesn't look like a locked clause," she remarked casually, her voice calm amidst the storm. "Looks more like a structure issue." It was written backwards from the logic in Article 127 of the Federal Contract Code. The silence that followed was absolute, hitting the room like a sudden power outage. 11 heads slowly, deliberately turned in unison. Arthur, too, pivoted, his gaze landing on the young woman, now adjusting her cleaning bucket. "How do you know that?" he asked, his tone surprisingly dry. Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. "Because I read it. It's in one of the books I have at home." "What kind of book?" Arthur pressed. "Civil and contract law. I have a whole set. A professor who used to live in my neighborhood gave them to me. I read one chapter a night after my son goes to bed." A mocking cough rippled through the lawyers. One, clearly annoyed, interjected, "With all due respect, this is a professional setting." Eleanor simply smiled. "And what I said, was it wrong? Because if it's just about the uniform, I can wear a suit tomorrow. I accidentally bought one thinking it was a sweatshirt." Arthur studied Eleanor, intrigued, as if she were a complex code he couldn't decipher. "Did you study law?" he asked. 3 years. I was 1 year away from graduating, but life got in the way. Working became more urgent than studying, but I never stopped reading. Just didn't get the degree." Arthur rose slowly, walking past his high-priced legal team as if no one else existed but Eleanor. He stopped a few feet away. "Repeat what you said in detail." Eleanor calmly set down her mop and crossed her arms. Clause 38B was written with a structure that depends on the conditional paragraph in Section 14, but it goes against Article 127 of the Federal Code. That opens a door for it to be voided due to interpretive ambiguity, especially if you argue it based on the precedent Garvin v. Dakota Energy 2019. Another silence fell deeper than the first. This time, no one dared to cough. Arthur's eyes remained fixed on her. For the first time in years, his face was devoid of judgment, as if he were witnessing something that defied the neat spreadsheets of his world. One of the lawyers attempted to interrupt. "This can't be right. The analysis was done by experts. Maybe she's just confusing some terms." Eleanor merely shrugged, then read it again carefully at home. "It's on page 197 of Volume 2 from Professor Albright's series. It's a good read after dinner." Arthur crossed his arms, his expression a mix of disbelief and burgeoning curiosity. He didn't look bored. He looked deeply intrigued. "What's your name?" "Eleanor Vance." "Miss Eleanor Vance, let's talk in my office." Eleanor blinked. but the floor's still wet. Let the lawyers step around it, Arthur said, turning to his stunned team. Or is that too much to ask? The meeting concluded in silence. Eleanor, unsure whether this was a reprimand or a promotion, pushed her cleaning cart into the hallway, a crooked smile playing on her lips. Arthur's office was hushed, as if even the furniture understood that unnecessary noise had no place there. Eleanor entered, leaving her cleaning cart outside, not because anyone told her to, but because she instinctively understood what Arthur truly sought from her at that moment. Arthur stood by his desk holding a tablet. The screen displayed a lengthy clause riddled with convoluted commas and bureaucratic jargon. He said nothing for a moment, simply gesturing for her to sit. Eleanor eyed the elegant chair as if it were a throne from a fantastical film, then slowly sat, adjusting her Garfield t-shirt, which seemed even more out of place than a cat in a courtroom. This clause here, Arthur finally began, was used as a model in a merger contract between two energy companies in Florida. One of our lawyers thinks it might be useful. What do you think? Eleanor quickly read the first few paragraphs on the screen, her eyes naturally gliding over the dense legal text. When she finished, she leaned back and spoke calmly. It works if the goal is to confuse whoever reads it. This clause is nice, full of technical terms, but it hides the main point behind 5 subjunctives and 2 ambiguities. It's a trap, and not even a good one. Arthur's eyebrow rose. Explain. Well, the phrase transfer of contractual responsibility comes before the conditional clause, which directly conflicts with Article 21 of the Civil Code. If a careful judge reads it, they'll see it as intentional omission. You memorize articles, Arthur asked. No, I understand the reasoning behind them. The number is just the address. The content is what matters. Arthur looked at Eleanor as if she were a chess piece he hadn't seen on the board before, suddenly realizing it was the most dangerous one in the game. And this one, he asked, sliding the tablet to open a new document, an asset protection clause for unilateral termination. Eleanor read for a few seconds, then shook her head. That's been thrown out of court at least 3 times. There's a recent case, Rowan versus Palms Trading 2021. The side that included this clause lost because it violated the principle of good faith in contracts. The judge was clear. You can't protect assets by hiding risks in legal fine print. Arthur leaned back against his desk, arms crossed. And what if I told you 3 of my experienced lawyers approved this wording? I'd say they should read more books and fewer canned contracts. The silence in the office was broken only by the distant sounds of the city. Arthur, for the first time in years, seemed unguarded. Not from weakness, but from a different kind of surprise. Admiration. How do you remember so many cases? He asked, more curious than critical. I read everything out loud. My 6-year-old Michael can already say jurisprudence, even though he thinks it's a cartoon character's name. Arthur laughed, a quick, restrained, yet genuine laugh. You're unexpected. I tend to have that effect, especially on deep cleaning days. He walked to the desk and picked up a blue folder, placing it in front of her. This is the contract we're trying to protect. If Renshaw manages to invalidate Clause 38B, they'll have an opening to void the entire agreement. That would be disastrous. Eleanor opened the folder and studied the pages. You forgot to use a generic safeguard in the contract's closing section. A cautious lawyer would have added that automatically. But sometimes geniuses forget the obvious. Arthur frowned. Are you saying our lawyers are careless? I'm saying sometimes vanity takes the place of caution, and when that happens, the contract ends up with too much ego and not enough precaution. He looked at her not with his usual sternness, but as if trying to discern the source of her remarkable insight. You studied law but didn't finish. 3.5 years. I left because I had to choose between a diploma and milk in the fridge. My ex-partner said he wasn't ready to be a father, but the baby came anyway, and books don't cry at night, you know. So I studied when I could and worked when I had to. Arthur nodded, accepting her words without judgment. You know you can't act as a lawyer. That's illegal. I know. I'm not going to sign anything or show up anywhere, but I can think, observe, suggest. That's still allowed. He turned his back to her, looking out the window. The city lights outside seemed less bright than the keen mind he had just discovered within his own company. I need you, he said, still gazing out. But no one can know. Eleanor crossed her legs, relaxed like a seasoned strategist, more like a strategic ally. If anyone finds out I'm taking legal advice from a cleaning staff member, this will turn into a soap opera and an institutional crisis. So she continued, a slight smile forming. I'll be your cleaner of confidential clauses then. He turned to her. You in? She stood up, picked up her bucket, and replied with a quiet confidence, "As long as I don't have to wear high heels, my uniform says it all." Eleanor embraced her new covert role, wearing the same worn-out sneakers as always. The only change was that now, alongside her bucket and rag, she carried a hard-covered notebook, diligently jotting down lawyers' names, complicated legal terms, and brilliant ideas that came to her while scrubbing floors. Arthur had been unequivocal. No one was to know her true function. Officially, she remained the cleaner for the administrative wing, but in reality, she was far more the company's invisible linchpin, the sharp intellect behind critical decisions that even the experienced lawyers couldn't handle independently. It began subtly the following Tuesday when Arthur discreetly asked her to review an email intended for an outside consulting firm. The content was technical, yet vague. Eleanor read it, scratched her chin, and asked, "Mind if I tweak it a little?" Arthur shrugged. She sat down, typed quickly, and returned the laptop. The new paragraph read, based on the interpretive safeguard clause in the contract signed by both parties and backed by federal law, Article 64C, we believe the proposed contract revision lacks sufficient basis and therefore is not advisable. Sincerely, P.S. If you disagree, we're happy to discuss it over coffee. Just bring cookies. Arthur raised an eyebrow. Cookies? Technical term to lighten the mood. They'll laugh, but they'll also know you're serious. He didn't utter a word, simply clicked send. Before long, Eleanor started receiving quiet requests. A lawyer might leave a sticky note on her cart. Does the cross-compensation clause apply to services? She would leave a folded note by the coffee machine, only if it's clearly stated, and even then, watch out for Article 92. No one knew the source of these sharp, precise replies. But suddenly the firm's mistakes began to shrink. Arthur's meetings grew shorter and more effective, and the most challenging questions were no longer posed aloud in the hallways, but whispered during coffee breaks. On the third day, Eleanor sat quietly in the break room, writing in her notebook, when she overheard two lawyers talking. Arthur is acting different, more direct, more precise, and the weird part, without our help. Maybe he hired an outside consultant, or maybe a legal crystal ball. Eleanor smiled. So far, no one suspected her, but that wouldn't last. The conflict erupted one Friday morning when Julian Thorne, a young pompous intern with an ego large enough to require its own security badge, walked into the back office and caught Eleanor replying to an email on Arthur's computer. "What are you doing there?" he demanded. She looked at him calmly, replying to a legal email about a merger and a reversibility clause. "Want to take a look?" He stormed over, outraged. "This is a clear violation of procedure. You're not even supposed to use this system. You're just a cleaning lady." Eleanor took a deep breath. There was no anger in her posture, only the steady resolve of someone who refused to be belittled. Anyone can read the law, but to understand its soul is a privilege for those who study beyond the page. She said, looking him directly in the eye. Julian frowned. "That's not in the code." "No, it's not. It's from the preface of Professor Albright's book. The same professor who teaches your graduate classes. I took it from his book." The ensuing silence was louder than any accusation. From that day forward, Eleanor was informally known as the voice in the footnotes. No one knew precisely who she was, but rumors began to spread. The fact that Arthur continued to consult her without explanation only deepened the mystery. One afternoon, a sensitive document landed on Arthur's desk, a letter threatening litigation, written in an aggressive, intimidating tone. He walked into his office and, without calling anyone, handed the letter to Eleanor. She read it, thought for 2 minutes, and then wrote a brief, direct, clear reply, infused with just the right touch of irony. "We appreciate your concern regarding the potential legal outcomes of this contract. However, we believe there's no reason for legal theatrics or imaginary contractual ghosts. Our team, visible or not, is ready for any move with respect and without fear." Arthur read it and for the first time publicly smiled. That same week, during a break, Eleanor walked past a meeting room where two interns were debating whether to activate a joint liability clause in a partnership agreement. "It depends on how the bond was formed," Eleanor said, continuing to walk. The two young men looked at each other, puzzled. "What do you mean?" She turned back with a smile. "If the joint responsibility was set by agreement, then yes. But if it's assumed just by interpretation, you risk canceling the original intent. It's an Article 265. Good luck, gentlemen." She walked away as if she had merely commented on the weather. Watching everything from his office, Arthur did something unusual. He wrote Eleanor's name in a notebook he rarely used, as if to remind himself that true intelligence sometimes appeared in a faded t-shirt and an old backpack. It was almost 10 at night when Eleanor finished organizing the last documents on Arthur's desk. The office was quiet, dimly lit by the desk lamp casting a warm circle over the scattered papers. Outside, the Chicago skyline glowed through the large windows, but inside that room, the world had narrowed to just two people in a conversation that was about to begin. Arthur leaned back, watching Eleanor carefully fold a sheet of paper where she had written notes about the Renshaw case. He noticed she always folded papers the same way, twice, into neat rectangles, as if each deserved respect. "You don't have to stay this late," he finally said, breaking the silence. "I know, but I like the office when it's empty. It's easier to think when no one's looking at me like I'm some kind of circus act." Eleanor put the last book into her bag and sat in the simple wooden chair across from him, a stark contrast to the elegant armchair used during formal meetings, making her feel more present, more real. "Can I ask you something?" Arthur leaned forward. "Sure, but if it's about case law, I charge extra after 9. He smiled, but his expression quickly turned serious. "Why did you study law? I mean, what made you choose that field?" Eleanor took a deep breath, as if opening a drawer she hadn't looked inside for a long time. "My father was a construction worker. He died when I was 16 in a work accident. The company he worked for tried not to pay compensation to my mother. They said he wasn't wearing safety equipment, that it was his fault. A complete lie." She paused, looking down at her hands. "My mother didn't know how to fight back. We couldn't afford a lawyer, and the few who agreed to talk to us acted like they were doing us a favor, like we should be grateful just for being heard." Arthur leaned in, listening intently. "And then I thought if I knew the law, if I understood how things worked, maybe I could help her. Maybe I could help other people in the same situation. So I enrolled in college with a scholarship." "Did you win the case?" Arthur asked. "We did. After 2 years of fighting, my mother used the money to open a small dressmaking shop in our neighborhood. It's still there. She sews party dresses for girls who want to feel like princesses." Eleanor smiled, though there was a soft sadness in it. "You must have been an excellent student," Arthur commented. "I was. Good grades, part of study groups, loved discussing cases with the professors. I had a plan, finish my degree, go to grad school, maybe one day open a legal aid office in my neighborhood." "What happened?" The question hung in the air. Eleanor tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture Arthur had noticed she made when gathering her thoughts. "Michael's father," she said finally. "I met him in my second year. He was studying business, a year ahead of me. Nice smile, easy to talk to, dreams that seemed to match mine, or so I thought." Arthur noticed his own breathing had become more focused. "We dated for a year and a half. I was in my 3rd year when I found out I was pregnant. It was unexpected, but when I told him, I thought we'd face it together. But that's not what happened. He panicked, said he was too young to be a father, that he still had too many plans, and maybe it would be better to take care of the situation another way." Eleanor paused, looking out the window. "I told him I respected his decision not to be a father, but that I was going to have the baby, and he didn't need to worry because I'd manage on my own." "And did you?" Arthur asked. "I had to. I dropped out in the middle of my 3rd year. The scholarship didn't cover daycare, and my mother was already busy with the shop, so she couldn't take care of Michael all the time. I needed to work." Arthur felt something stir in his chest, a mix of admiration and frustration he couldn't quite name. And Michael's father, he disappeared, literally moved to another city after graduation. I never saw him again. Michael used to ask about his father when he was little, but he doesn't anymore. I think he understands we're a complete family just the way we are. And you never thought about going back to college?" Eleanor gave a quiet laugh. "I did. I thought about it every night when I'd put Michael to bed and open the books I managed to borrow or buy secondhand at fairs. But then I realized something I never stopped studying. I just changed the way I did it." She got up and went to the window, looking out at the city lights. "I started going to the neighborhood library. They had a small legal section, but it was complete. Professor Albright, the same one I mentioned to Julian, used to give extra lessons there on Saturdays. When he heard my story, he started lending me books." "Lending you books?" Arthur asked. "At first, yes. Then when he saw I really studied them, took notes, understood what I read, he started giving me the books. He said books are meant to be read, not just sit on a shelf for decoration." Arthur got up too. walking to stand beside her at the window. And you never felt angry about having to give up your plans. Eleanor turned to him, and for the first time that night, her eyes shone with a different kind of intensity. I did for a long time. Angry at Michael's father, at the situation, at myself, for falling in love with someone who wasn't ready to build anything serious. But after Michael was born, she paused, as if reliving the moment when he was born, and I held him for the first time. I understood my plans hadn't been destroyed. They just changed shape. I wouldn't be the lawyer I dreamed of being at 18, but I would be the mother I wanted to be at 20. And now, do you regret it? Having Michael? Never. He's the best part of me. He taught me that courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and moving forward. Arthur watched her profile against the city lights. There was something in Eleanor he'd never seen before, a strength that didn't come from trying to prove anything to anyone, but from knowing exactly who she was. And you still study every night after he falls asleep. I open my books. I read cases, study legal precedents, follow changes in the law. Not because I have to, because I want to, because it makes sense to me. Even knowing you can't practicing law is one thing. Understanding it is another. And who knows, maybe one day I'll go back to college. Michael is growing up, becoming more independent. Maybe it'll be time to finish what I started. Arthur felt a strange emotion rise in his chest. It was admiration, yes, but more than that, it was as if he stood before someone who had turned every obstacle into a step, every fall into a push to climb higher. You're remarkable. He said the word escaping with more feeling than he intended. I'm a single mother who cleans offices and reads legal books in her spare time. Nothing too remarkable about that. You're wrong. You took a situation that could have destroyed you and turned it into strength. You raised a child on your own, never stopped learning, never lost your kindness or your sense of humor. And on top of that, you solve problems that lawyers with doctorates can't figure out. Eleanor smiled, a moist shine in her eyes. Michael asked me the other day if I was sad about not becoming a lawyer. Do you know what I told him? I told him, maybe I didn't become the lawyer I dreamed of being, but I became the person I needed to be, and that was worth even more. The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Arthur watched Eleanor smooth her hair, pick up her bag, returning to her efficient employee mode. But something had irrevocably shifted between them. An intimacy had formed, a mutual understanding that went beyond their professional partnership. I need to go, she said. Michael goes to bed early, but he likes me to be there when he wakes up in the middle of the night. Sometimes he has nightmares. Of course. Thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for listening. She walked to the door but turned before leaving. And Arthur, this conversation stays between us. All right, not because it's a secret, but because it's personal. Of course, he replied. Left alone in the office, Arthur gazed at the chair where she had been sitting. For the first time in years, he felt small, not diminished, but humbled, as if he had just met someone who made him question everything he thought he knew about strength, determination, and worth. The next day, Arthur arrived at the office earlier than usual, not for urgent meetings, but to observe. He wanted to better understand the woman who had, in a single conversation, reshaped his view of intelligence and character. He positioned himself strategically in the break room, where he could see the main hallway. At 8:15, Eleanor walked in, wearing her blue uniform and old backpack. But Arthur now saw her differently. Every move, every smile to a coworker conveyed a kindness beyond mere politeness. He watched her stop to help an intern who had dropped a stack of papers. Instead of simply picking them up, she organized them by date, handing them back with a joke about papers having a life of their own in law offices. The young man laughed, visibly relieved. Later, during a meeting with the legal team, Arthur caught himself wondering what Eleanor would say about each point. When a lawyer proposed a weak strategy, he almost murmured Eleanor would say, "That has a loophole in Clause 3, but held back." At lunchtime, he saw her sitting alone in the courtyard, eating a sandwich and reading a book on constitutional law. It wasn't a performance. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was genuine interest, a true passion for learning. Arthur realized he was experiencing something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't the kind of physical attraction he'd felt for other women, nor merely professional respect for a competent colleague. It was deeper, more complex admiration mixed with curiosity, respect blended with an urge to know more, to understand how such a brilliant mind had developed in such challenging circumstances. He was fascinated by how she transformed difficulty into insight, obstacles into opportunities for growth. By the end of the day, as the office began to empty, Arthur asked Eleanor to join him for a conversation. "I have something for you," he said, handing her an envelope. Eleanor opened it to find a significant check, enough to cover several months of expenses. "What's this?" she asked. "A bonus for all the help you've given me for solutions none of my lawyers could come up with." Eleanor looked at the check for a few seconds, then handed it back. "I can't accept this." "Why not? You deserve it. The value you bring to my work is worth far more than this." "Exactly why I can't accept it." Arthur frowned, puzzled. "I don't understand." Eleanor sat in the same chair she'd used the previous night. "If I accept this check, you'll feel like we're even, like you paid for my knowledge, for my help, and I'll feel like someone who got compensated for being useful. But that's exactly what I'm doing. Compensating someone who's been helpful. No, Arthur, I'm not a favor. I'm value." The words hung in the air, filled with dignity and resolve. "You don't get it," she continued. "I don't help you because I need money. I help you because I enjoy it, because it makes sense to me, because I finally get to use everything I've learned. Money would turn this into a transaction, but what we have here is a partnership." Arthur put the check away, feeling both turned down and deeply impressed. "Then how can I give back? Keep letting me be involved, keep trusting my judgment, and maybe, just maybe, see me as a person, not just a cleaning lady who happens to know the law." At that moment, Arthur realized what he was feeling. He was falling in love, not with Eleanor's looks, nor with her usefulness at work, but with her essence, her integrity, her mind, her ability to turn any situation into a chance to grow. And that scared him more than any lawsuit he had ever faced. Thursday morning began like any other at Sterling & Brooks. Eleanor arrived promptly at 8, greeted the front desk staff, and made her way to the administrative floor with her cleaning cart. What she didn't know was that just a few feet away, Leo Jenkins, a second-year intern and aspiring influencer, was discreetly recording a video for his social media channel. Leo had been intrigued by the office buzz rumors of a mysterious invisible consultant aiding Arthur Sterling with complex cases. When he saw Eleanor patiently explaining the difference between a termination clause and a cancellation clause to two other interns, he knew he had found perfect content. "Look, it's simple," Eleanor said, leaning on a broom as she gestured. "A termination clause is like a breakup where you just can't agree on movies anymore. It's over, but no one did anything wrong. Now, a rescission clause, that's when one person was secretly eating all the popcorn. That's a breach of trust." The interns chuckled, and one asked, "What if someone lied about liking horror movies just to impress the other?" "Well, my friend, that's misrepresentation. The whole agreement was based on false information that can make the contract invalid from the beginning. Like when you find out your crush doesn't even like dogs or pizza. That's a fundamental mismatch. Relationship voided." Leo continued recording, fascinated by how Eleanor clarified concepts his professors took hours to make half as clear. "And how do we know which one to use in each case?" another intern inquired. Main question: was there bad faith? If yes, it's rescission. If not, it's just termination. It's like breaking up over text or in person. Either way, it's over. But one's a little more respectful than the other. Eleanor grabbed her rag, ready to return to work, but one intern still had a question. What if both people want out of the contract, but for different reasons? Then you've got a mutual divorce with a fight over who keeps the dog. Bilateral termination with a specific division clause. Everyone takes what they brought in, but you've got to decide who keeps the shared Netflix account. The three burst out laughing, and Leo ended the recording with a close-up on Eleanor's face as she gave a relaxed wave to the camera. Folks, you've just watched the best contract law class in history, taught by the most unlikely expert at the fanciest law firm in Chicago. Now this is what access to knowledge looks like, Leo narrated into his phone. He posted the video on his social media channel at 2 in the afternoon with the caption, "POV, the janitor at your office explains contract law better than your Harvard professor. Simple law wisdom without diplomas. Legal legend." What followed surprised even Leo. Within 2 hours, the video had 50,000 views. After 4, it hit 200,000. By the end of the day, it had surpassed 500,000, filled with excited comments from law students, lawyers, and professors alike. This woman explained in 2 minutes what my professor couldn't explain in a whole semester. Does anyone know where she teaches? I'm dropping out of college to study with her. Finally, someone who makes law make sense. Wait, she's a janitor. How is she better than a Harvard PhD? The video was shared in private groups at law schools across the country. It went viral on a popular social media platform under the hashtag #JanitorJD, and other platforms lit up with stories quoting Eleanor's explanations. A legal news site shared the clip with the headline, "Cleaning Staff Member Teaches Contract Law Goes Viral on Social Media." Another outlet ran a full article, "The Accidental Educator Who's Changing How We Talk About the Law." But the real explosion occurred when a popular page posted an image of Eleanor holding her broom next to 11 solemn lawyers in robes captioned, "The Janitor Who Outsmarted 11 Doctors of Law." The meme spread like wildfire with dozens of versions. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at work unaware of what had transpired. She was greeted by curious stares, whispered conversations, and knowing smiles. She only realized something was amiss when the receptionist, barely containing her excitement, showed Eleanor a phone. "Eleanor, you've gone viral, over 2 million views." Eleanor watched the video with an amused look, shaking her head. "That Leo. I always thought he recorded too much." "You're not mad?" the receptionist asked. "Why would I be? Did I say anything wrong?" "No, but you didn't ask to be filmed." "That's true, but I didn't say anything classified either." And from the comments I'm seeing, people are learning. That's a good thing. When Arthur arrived an hour later, there were already 3 calls from journalists waiting, 2 emails from television producers wanting to interview the viral cleaner, and a message from Human Resources asking how to handle the situation. Arthur immediately summoned Leo. "You had no right to film an employee without permission. Mr. Sterling, I didn't know it was going to go viral like that. It was just a silly video for my followers. Take the video down now." "But sir, it's already been shared thousands of times. Even if I delete it, it won't make much difference. And well, technically, I recorded it in a public area of the office, and she didn't say anything about not wanting to be filmed." Arthur took a deep breath, trying to control his irritation. He wasn't angry about Eleanor's success, but worried about the potential repercussions. The firm could face questions about its hiring practices, about why a cleaning staff member possessed such advanced legal knowledge about the overall competence of the legal team. He called Eleanor into his office for a private talk. "Eleanor, we need to talk about this situation. The video, I saw it. It's funny. Do you understand the implications? The press might want to talk to you, dig into your story, ask why you're not practicing law. And I'll answer with the truth that I studied law, didn't finish because of personal reasons, but kept studying because I enjoy it. What's the problem? The problem is this could create an awkward situation for the firm. People will question our competence, ask why we rely on a cleaning staff member to solve complex cases." Eleanor crossed her arms, adopting a more serious tone. "Arthur, are you embarrassed by me?" The question caught him off guard. "That's not it." "Then what is it? Did I share any confidential information, break any protocol, disrespect a client? No. But then let me ask you something. Would you rather have a team that pretends to know everything, or someone who really understands the subject, no matter their job title?" Arthur was silent for a few seconds. "You're right. I'm sorry. It's just this kind of attention could complicate our partnership. Our partnership has always been complicated, Arthur, since day one, and it still worked." She stood and walked to the window. "You know what I think about that video? If people laugh at me, I hope they learned something in the process. How many law students do you think understood concepts that were stuck in their heads just because I used analogies with relationships and Netflix? Probably a lot. Then the video served a purpose, and if it causes any problems for the firm, we'll deal with them. But I'm not going to hide just because people found out intelligence doesn't come with a diploma." Arthur watched her once again, impressed by her ability to transform a potentially messy situation into an opportunity for profound reflection. "You're not afraid of being judged," he observed. "Arthur, I'm a single mother, a cleaner who studies law on her breaks. If I were afraid of judgment, I wouldn't even leave the house. What matters to me is, am I doing something useful? Am I helping someone? Am I being true to myself? And are you? I am. So, let the memes come. The interviews, the questions. I'll answer everything as naturally as I explain contract clauses." That afternoon, when 3 more news outlets reached out wanting to interview the cleaner who had become a phenomenon, Arthur didn't try to block them. Instead, he simply asked Eleanor if she needed anything. "Just promise me one thing," she said. "What? If any journalist asks about my boss, tell them he's the smartest person I know, because it's true, and because intelligence recognizes intelligence." It was official. Arthur was completely in love. The case of Renshaw versus Sterling and Brooks was scheduled for Monday at 9 in the morning in the Chicago Superior Court. It was the kind of trial that would determine not only the firm's financial future, but also its reputation in the market. $60 million were at stake, along with the credibility Arthur had meticulously built over 15 years. On the Friday, before the tension in the office was palpable, the lawyers reviewed arguments, checked precedents, and exchanged nervous glances in the hallways. Everyone knew the defense strategy hinged on a complex interpretation of Clause 38B, the very clause Eleanor had flagged as problematic weeks before. Arthur was in his office surrounded by stacks of documents and 3 senior attorneys who looked more anxious than confident. "The argument is solid," said Mr. Davison, the most experienced on the team, "but the prosecution will go after our interpretation of the safeguard clause," added Miss Albright, second in command. "And if they cite the Morrison versus Atlantic precedent," Miss Albright asked, "our defense will be weakened." Arthur rubbed his temples. He had studied the case for weeks, but something still bothered him. A piece of the puzzle didn't quite fit. That was when Eleanor knocked on the door. "Excuse me, can I come in?" Of course. She was carrying a tray with coffee and a folder tucked under her arm. "I brought you some coffee and, well, I heard you talking about Morrison versus Atlantic." Mr. Davison raised an eyebrow. "And you're worried about the wrong precedent." The room fell silent. Eleanor placed the tray on the table and opened her folder. The Morrison versus Atlantic ruling was partially overturned 6 months later by Hamilton versus Shore Industries. "The interpretation you're worried about is no longer valid." Miss Albright quickly flipped through her documents. "That's not in our research. That's because it was published in a lesser-known journal, not the major law reviews, but it completely changed the legal precedent. What you should be watching out for is Nelson versus Phoenix Corporation from 2 months ago." Arthur leaned forward. "Explain." "The Nelson case introduced a new way of interpreting ambiguous clauses in merger contracts. If the prosecution cites that case, then yes, you've got a problem. But you also have a solution." She pulled up a chair and sat between them, spreading papers across the table. In Nelson, the judge used a strictly literal reading of the law, ignoring the historical context. But there's an older case, Fitzgerald versus Morgan Steel from 1987, that perfectly fits our situation. Over the next 2 hours, Eleanor completely restructured the defense strategy. She didn't just point out weaknesses. She built a solid new approach based on precedents the other lawyers hadn't even known existed. "You should be the one in court on Monday," Mr. Davison said, clearly impressed. "I can't and I won't." "Why not?" "Because that's not where I belong. I belong here helping you get ready. Arthur's going to shine in that courtroom, and you'll all see why he's one of the best attorneys in Chicago." On Sunday night, Arthur called Eleanor. "I'm nervous." "Nervous or insecure?" she asked. "What's the difference? Nervous means you know you're prepared, but your heart's still racing. Insecure means you're not sure you're up to it. Then, I'm nervous." "Good. That means you care about the outcome." "Now, tell me what's the central point of our argument." For 40 minutes, Eleanor had him review key points, tested his responses to possible questions, and reminded him of crucial precedents. By the time they hung up, Arthur felt confident for the first time in weeks. On Monday morning, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, law students, and curious spectators drawn by the attention surrounding the viral cleaning lady filled every available seat. Eleanor sat quietly at the back, wearing a simple blouse and jeans. Arthur began strongly. His opening argument was clear, persuasive, and well-structured. He cited the precedents Eleanor had recommended and laid out a solid line of reasoning. For 40 minutes, he completely commanded the courtroom. But then the prosecution struck back. "Your Honor," said the prosecutor, a well-dressed woman in her 50s, "the defense relies on a questionable interpretation of Fitzgerald versus Morgan Steel. I'd like to point out that this precedent was partially modified by the recent ruling in Torres versus Infinity Holdings." Arthur felt the blood drain from his face. Torres versus Infinity Holdings. He didn't know that case. It hadn't appeared in his research. Eleanor hadn't mentioned it. "The change introduced by Torres versus Infinity," the prosecutor continued, "clearly states that in merger contracts with ambiguous clauses, the interpretation must favor the party that did not draft the original document." The judge leaned in, clearly interested. Arthur knew he had to respond, but he had no idea how to counter a precedent he'd never seen. His team looked just as lost. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, "would you like to respond to the precedent raised by the prosecution?" Arthur stood, but his mind was blank. He looked through his papers searching for anything, but found nothing. Then he heard a soft voice behind him. Article 127, paragraph 3. Partial, not full modification. It was Eleanor. She had stood up, and speaking just loud enough for him to hear, she gave him exactly what he needed. Arthur took a deep breath and turned to the judge. Your Honor, with all due respect to the prosecution, it's important to clarify that Torres versus Infinity Holdings introduced only a partial modification to the Fitzgerald versus Morgan Steel precedent, not a full repeal. He began walking through the courtroom again, confidence returning. Article 127, paragraph 3 states that partial changes to precedents should only apply to the specific aspects questioned in the new ruling. As Eleanor explained in Torres versus Infinity, the core issue was how to interpret clauses in hostile takeovers, not friendly mergers like the one we're discussing today. The prosecutor frowned clearly, not expecting that answer. Also, Arthur continued, the judge in Torres versus Infinity made it very clear that his decision wasn't meant to apply broadly to all types of mergers, only to those involving coercion or major information imbalance. In our case, we have a friendly merger with full information shared between both sides, documented over 8 months of negotiations. So Torres versus Infinity doesn't apply. The original interpretation from Fitzgerald versus Morgan Steel still stands valid and relevant. The courtroom fell quiet, broken only by the sound of the judge tapping his pen on the desk. Mr. Sterling, your argument is consistent and well supported. The objection is overruled. 2 hours later, Arthur had won the case. The decision was unanimous. Clause 38B was valid. The contract remained in effect, and Sterling and Brooks kept not only the $60 million at stake, but also their reputation. Back at the office, everyone was celebrating. But before anything else, Arthur went looking for Eleanor. I need to talk to you. They met in his office, away from the congratulations and toasts. How did you know about Torres versus Infinity, he asked. I looked it up last night when you told me you were nervous. I figured I'd check if any recent cases could cause problems for our strategy. I found 3, including that one. And why didn't you tell me before? Because you were already under pressure, and I knew that if it came up, you'd be able to handle it with the right info in the moment. Arthur sat on the edge of his desk. Eleanor, you saved my career today. You saved your own career. I just whispered a tip. No, it was much more than that. You've been helping me from day one. He stepped closer. I want to make it official. Will you be my personal assistant and lead legal advisor, full salary, full benefits, and the recognition you deserve? Eleanor's eyes welled up. Are you serious completely? This isn't a favor. This isn't charity. It's respect for your professional value. I accept. They hugged. It was a professional hug, but it lasted a few seconds longer than it needed to. That evening, Arthur organized a celebratory dinner at the Rosewood, one of Chicago's most elegant restaurants. The entire legal team was there, along with several important clients. When Eleanor arrived, Arthur almost didn't recognize her. She wore a simple navy blue dress, elegant but understated, and her hair, usually tied back, was loose. She looked beautiful, yet completely herself. During the dinner, she spoke with ease about legal cases, made people laugh with her creative analogies, and carried herself with a quiet confidence that had nothing to do with her clothes or shoes. Arthur couldn't take his eyes off her all night, the way she gestured while explaining a point, the way she smiled when someone asked a clever question, the way she treated everyone, from the waiter to the top partners, with the same warmth and respect. At the end of the night, as the group began to leave, Arthur offered to drive Eleanor home. You don't need to. I can call an Uber. I insist. After everything you've done for me, it's the least I can do. On the way, they talked about the trial, her new role, and a few last details of the case. The conversation flowed easily with quiet moments that felt natural, not awkward. When they arrived at Eleanor's building, Arthur turned off the engine. Eleanor, he said, turning to her. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. Something had been building for weeks, an unspoken connection, a quiet pull. Arthur leaned in and kissed her. It was gentle at first, uncertain, then deeper. Eleanor responded, her hands touching his face, lost in the moment. When they pulled apart, both were breathless. That was a mistake, Arthur said, his voice suddenly tense. What? It shouldn't have happened. You work for me now. This complicates everything. That was inappropriate. Eleanor stayed silent, taking in his words. Arthur, it's best if you forget that ever happened, please. She looked at him for a few seconds, then got out of the car without another word. Arthur watched her go into the building, knowing he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. The next morning, Arthur arrived at the office 2 hours earlier than usual. He hadn't slept well, replaying the kiss, and especially the look on Eleanor's face when he called it a mistake. Her quiet disappointment, 1,000 times worse than anger, had haunted him all night. At 9 in the morning, when Eleanor arrived for work, she found a bouquet of white roses on her new desk. A real desk with drawers and everything on the administrative floor. It was an elegant, expensive arrangement costing more than her previous week's salary. The attached card simply read, "I apologize for my inappropriate behavior yesterday. Ass." Eleanor looked at the flowers for a few seconds, then calmly walked to Arthur's office. He was on the phone but ended the call when he saw her enter carrying the bouquet. "Eleanor, they're very pretty," she said, setting the flowers on his desk. "But I'm allergic. Allergic to roses. Allergic to expensive scented apologies." She left a small folded note next to the bouquet and walked out before he could reply. The note read, "Next time you want to apologize, try talking. Flowers die in a week. Honest words last forever." Over the next few days, Arthur attempted more subtle approaches. He left coffee from her favorite neighborhood cafe on her desk, a small local place near her home, very different from the office's gourmet coffee. Eleanor thanked him politely, drank it, but made it clear that professional courtesy didn't erase personal discomfort. When he offered to help organize the legal library she had requested for her new office, Eleanor replied, "Thank you, but I'll manage. I always have." There was no hostility in her voice, just a firm setting of boundaries that hadn't existed before that unresolved kiss. On Wednesday, Arthur tried a different tactic. During a meeting about a new case, he asked for Eleanor's opinion in front of the entire legal team. "Our new advisor certainly has a valuable perspective on this issue," he said, looking directly at her. Eleanor responded with perfect professionalism, offered precise suggestions, and helped resolve a deadlock that had stalled discussion for 2 hours. But when the meeting ended and the other lawyers left praising her contribution, she turned to Arthur. "Don't use my work to try to fix what broke outside of it. That's not what It is. And you don't need to. My work speaks for itself. It always has. I don't need you to validate me professionally to make up for what happened personally." On Thursday, Arthur left a book on her desk, New Precedents in Contract Law, a collection released just the week before. It was exactly the kind of reading he knew she'd love. Eleanor flipped through it, clearly interested, but returned it at the end of the day with a sticky note. "Thanks for the loan. I've already ordered my own copy." On Friday, when Arthur tried to start a conversation about a case they were reviewing together, Eleanor gently interrupted. "Arthur, can we set some rules?" "Of course. First, my work stays excellent because I love what I do, not because you need me. Second, our professional partnership is solid and will stay that way. Third, what happened in the parking lot stays in the parking lot. And the fourth rule, stop trying to make up for what you said with small gestures. If you really believe it was a mistake, then it was. That's it. Let's move on." Arthur nodded, but there was something in his eyes that Eleanor chose not to interpret. Over the weekend, Michael was playing in the living room when he saw the same black car outside that had dropped his mother off the night before. "Mom, the flower man is down there again." "The flower man?" Eleanor asked. "The one who sent the white flowers you gave back. The same one who brought you home after the fancy dinner." Eleanor went to the window. Arthur was standing next to his car, looking at the building, but not daring to come up. "Michael, come here." The boy came over curious. "This man, is he your friend or your boyfriend?" Eleanor smiled, brushing her son's hair back. "Why do you want to know?" "Because if he's your friend, you should invite him up. Grandma Maria always says friends are welcome. But if he's your boyfriend, if he's my boyfriend, what? Then you have to decide if you really like him or if he's just confused. Because a confused boyfriend makes you sad, and I don't like it when you're sad." Eleanor hugged her son, amazed by the wisdom of a 6-year-old. "And what do you think he is?" Michael thought for a few seconds, watching Arthur through the window. "I think he's a friend who wanted to be a boyfriend but got scared. Like Peter in my class, he likes Sophia but pretends he doesn't because the other boys would laugh at him. You're very smart, you know that. Grandma Maria always says that. She also says grown-ups can be sillier than kids sometimes." Eleanor laughed still, watching Arthur on the street. "You know what your grandma's right." Arthur stayed on the sidewalk for another 10 minutes, then got in his car and drove off. Eleanor stood at the window, contemplating her son's words and the complex feelings she couldn't quite name. Michael, who had returned to his toys, called from the living room. "Mom, if he comes back tomorrow, can I talk to him? Grown-ups who are confused sometimes need help from kids." Eleanor shook her head, smiling. Her son was right. Adults often made simple things far too complicated. The next Monday, Arthur showed up at Eleanor's desk with an unexpected proposal. "Want to have lunch outside? I need to talk to you about a case, but away from the office." Eleanor looked at him, sensing a shift in his demeanor. He seemed less guarded, more human. "What kind of case?" "The kind that can't be solved with case law." They went to a small cafe downtown, far from the upscale restaurants Arthur usually frequented. It was a simple place with worn wooden tables and a handwritten menu on a chalkboard, the kind of place where Eleanor felt at ease. Arthur ordered a sandwich he barely touched. Eleanor ate her salad, watching him fidget with a napkin. So she said after a few minutes of silence, "What kind of case has you this unsettled?" "I'm the case." She stopped eating and waited. "Eleanor, I don't know how to handle what I'm feeling." "And what are you feeling?" "Ever since you came into my life, everything's changed. The way I work, the way I think, the way I exist. And that scares me." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I've never felt this way before. I've never admired someone so much. I've never wanted so badly to be near someone, to hear what they think, to understand how they see the world." Eleanor set her fork down and gave him her full attention. "Are you confused because you fell in love, or because you fell in love with me?" The question caught him off guard. "What's the difference?" "The difference is that maybe you're not used to women who don't need you, just the real you." Arthur frowned. "What do you mean, the women you've known before they needed your status, your money, your influence? I don't need any of that." "And that leaves you with no reference point, doesn't it?" He sat in silence, taking in her words. "Maybe you're right. It's not a maybe. You've spent your whole life being needed by people for the wrong reasons. With me, you're just you, Arthur. Not the CEO, not the wealthy guy, just the smart man who asks good questions and sometimes laughs at my bad jokes. Your jokes aren't bad. Yes, they are, but you laugh anyway." They both smiled, and the tension softened. "So that's it," Arthur said. "I'm confused because you make me feel both unnecessary and essential at the same time." "Exactly. You don't have to be anything but yourself, and that terrifies you." "It does, because it means if you like me, it's for me, and if you don't, it's also for me." Arthur nodded, recognizing the clear, sharp truth in her words. "And about the kiss," he said, finally addressing the unspoken issue between them. "I really believe it was inappropriate. You work for me now, and I don't want you to feel pressured or uncomfortable." Eleanor tilted her head, studying him. "Then maybe you should think a little more before going around kissing people. Or did you kiss me out of admiration?" "No, I kissed you because in that moment, I couldn't imagine anything more right in the world. And after that, fear took over. Fear of making things complicated, of losing you as a colleague, of, I don't know, not being enough." Eleanor leaned back, a soft smile on her lips. "Arthur, you're many things. Smart, dedicated, sometimes as stubborn as a mule. But not enough, never." "Then why do I feel like I am?" "Because you're learning how to be with someone who doesn't want anything from you except your company. That is scary." They finished lunch discussing work, but something had shifted between them. There was a new sense of understanding, a kind of honesty that hadn't been there before. When they returned to the office, Arthur walked with her to her desk. "Eleanor, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you feel anything for me?" She looked at him for a few seconds. "I'm sorry, but I'm confused too. And unlike you, I don't have the luxury of kissing someone and calling it a mistake afterward. When you figure out what you really want, let me know. Until then, we're colleagues. Good colleagues." That night at home, Eleanor was quieter than usual. Michael was asleep, and she was helping her mother Maria fold laundry in the living room. "You seem different," Maria observed, watching her daughter. "Different how sad. Not the kind of sad that makes you cry, but the kind that comes from thinking too much." Eleanor smiled. Her mother always had a way of reading her moods with surgical precision. "I'm okay, Mom. Just working through some changes." "What kind of changes?" "Work. Personal stuff. A little of everything." Maria stopped folding clothes and sat next to her daughter. "Talk to me. Work is going great. Better than I expected. I got the position I always wanted. I'm doing what I love and I'm getting paid well. But my boss is complicated." Complicated how Eleanor sighed. "He's smart, respectful, he values me professionally, and I feel something for him. And him. Does he feel something for you? I think so. But he keeps going back and forth. He calls his own feelings a mistake. Maria nodded as if everything suddenly made sense. Oh, I see. He's one of those men who don't know how to handle a strong woman. That's not it, Mom. He admires my strength. The problem is, I think it makes him insecure. And you, how do you feel confused? Because I care about him, but I don't know if he really wants me or if he just admires me. And I'm not sure I want to get involved with someone who doesn't even understand his own feelings. Maria hugged her daughter. Sweetheart, sometimes men take longer to figure out their hearts. Not because they're dumb, but because they're raised to believe that feelings are weakness. So, what should I do? You keep being yourself. If he's smart, he'll realize he found something rare. And if not, that's his loss. You've already proven you don't need anyone to be happy. Eleanor smiled, feeling just a little lighter. Thanks, Mom. You're welcome. And Eleanor, even if you're feeling unsure, you're glowing. That means something. That night, Eleanor fell asleep thinking about her mother's words and that conversation with Arthur. Maybe Maria was right. Sometimes you just had to be who you are and let the rest unfold on its own. In the days following that lunch conversation, Arthur did exactly what Eleanor expected. He pulled away. He reverted to being the distant, composed CEO, speaking to her with the cold professionalism he'd mastered over the years. In meetings, he referred to her as Miss Vance. In the hallways, he nodded politely, but didn't stop to talk. It was as if the honesty of that lunch had frightened him so profoundly that he retreated behind the business armor he'd worn for 15 years. Eleanor noticed immediately and responded in the only way she knew how, with dignity. If he desired distance, she gave him distance. If he preferred formality, she would be perfectly formal. But she also began to withdraw from the informal support she'd been providing. When Arthur left documents on her desk with sticky notes asking for input, she replied by email, technically sound detailed, but devoid of the playful comments she used to add. When he attempted to initiate a conversation about a case, she answered clearly and professionally, then promptly returned to her work. The shift didn't go unnoticed in the office. Miss Albright told Mr. Davison that the vibe between the boss and his new advisor had turned strangely formal. Leo, still proud of having spotted Eleanor's talent, observed that she wasn't cracking jokes during her legal explanations anymore. On Thursday, Arthur was reviewing a contract when he realized he needed Eleanor's opinion on a specific clause. Instead of walking over to her desk as he once had, he sent a formal email requesting written feedback. Her reply came 15 minutes later, 3 technically perfect paragraphs, completely impersonal. It was exactly what he had asked for, but it lacked the spark he had come to value in her work. That night alone at home, Arthur found himself searching for Eleanor on social media. Not something he normally did, but his curiosity had prevailed. Her profile was simple with just a few photos, but each told a story. There was a video of Michael from a few months earlier trying to pronounce jurisprudence while Eleanor laughed in the background. Another showed her explaining a health insurance contract to an elderly neighbor using cake recipe metaphors. One photo depicted her sitting in the local library surrounded by old law books, with Michael asleep in her lap. It was a world entirely different from his own, a place where knowledge was shared freely, where intelligence was used to help, not to compete. A place where she wasn't just respected, but loved. On Saturday, driven by something he couldn't quite name, Arthur drove to Eleanor's neighborhood. He had no specific plan, just an inexplicable need to better understand her world. He stopped in front of a small nonprofit called Hope Community Center. Through the window, he saw Eleanor sitting at a round table surrounded by several people. She was gesturing animatedly, explaining something while the others took notes. Arthur watched for a few minutes. There was something about Eleanor's posture there that he had never seen at the office, a natural ease, a genuine joy. She wasn't performing professionalism, she was simply being herself. He took a deep breath and went inside. The group stopped talking when they saw him. Eleanor looked up, clearly surprised. "Arthur, what are you doing here? I was driving by and saw you here." It was a blatant lie, and they both knew it. "This is Arthur Sterling," Eleanor told the group, "my boss." The famous boss from the legal viral video, an older woman, Mrs. Rosa, exclaimed, smiling. Eleanor was explaining rental contracts to us. Arthur greeted everyone politely, but his eyes kept returning to Eleanor. Can I talk to you for a minute?" They stepped to a corner of the room. "Seriously, what are you doing here?" Eleanor asked, but without hostility. "I wanted to understand how you do this, how you are. You. All the time, Eleanor studied him for a few seconds. Arthur, you drove 40 minutes to get here? Just to ask me that. Maybe. Why? He looked at the group who had resumed their discussion, then back at her. Because this week, I went back to being who I've always been, and I realized I don't like that person anymore. And what do you expect me to do about that? Will you let me learn from you? The question came out sounding more vulnerable than he intended. Eleanor was silent for a moment, then smiled for the first time in a week. That depends. Are you willing to listen to Mrs. Rosa explain why her apartment lease is unfair, even if it takes 2 hours? I am. And to help Mr. Carlos understand why the auto shop can't charge him for work he didn't approve, I am. And to do it without feeling superior to anyone here. Arthur looked around, seeing for the first time not people needing help, but people with knowledge and experience in things he had never imagined. I'm willing to try. Eleanor nodded. Then have a seat. Mrs. Rosa was just telling us how she figured out on her own that she was entitled to compensation no lawyer wanted to calculate for her. Arthur sat down, and for the first time in years, he stayed quiet to learn instead of teach. For the next 2 hours, he listened to stories that made him rethink everything he thought he knew about justice, intelligence, and human worth. When they left, Eleanor asked, "So did you learn anything I learned? That you're not just intelligent, you're wise, and there's a big difference between the two." What's the difference? Intelligence solves problems. Wisdom changes people. For the first time in weeks, they smiled at each other without any walls between them. The following Wednesday, Eleanor casually mentioned she'd be giving a talk at the community center on consumer rights. It was part of a project she'd been running for 2 years, teaching basic legal knowledge to people who couldn't afford lawyers. "Can I come?" Arthur asked, surprising himself with how natural it sounded. "Won't you find it boring?" "On the contrary, I think I need to see what real advocacy looks like." On Saturday afternoon, the small auditorium at the community center was packed. About 40 people filled the plastic chairs, from young mothers with babies on their laps to retired men with notebooks in hand. Arthur sat in the back, observing. Eleanor walked onto the small improvised stage with a natural ease he'd never seen in the corporate setting. She wore jeans and a simple blouse, her hair loose without the polished touches that characterized the business presentations he was accustomed to. "Good afternoon, everyone," she began with a genuine smile. "Today we're going to talk about something everyone should know: how not to get tricked when you buy something." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "First, let's agree on something. Everyone here has been tricked at least once. You have even that well-dressed gentleman in the back." She gestured discreetly toward Arthur, and more laughter followed, making Arthur feel included, not singled out. The difference is, when that happens to someone with money, they hire a lawyer. When it happens to people like us, we get upset, tell our friends, and that's it. We accept the loss. An older woman raised her hand. "But Eleanor, lawyers are expensive. What are we supposed to do?" "Mrs. Maria, that's exactly what I'm here to talk about today. You don't need a lawyer for everything. What you do need is to know your rights." For the next hour, Eleanor explained complex concepts using everyday examples. She talked about warranties by comparing them to relationships that don't work out, about abusive interest rates by comparing them to loans between friends, and about misleading contracts using recipes that hide ingredients as a metaphor. Arthur watched, fascinated by how she translated legal jargon into plain, relatable language without sacrificing technical accuracy. More importantly, he noticed how people perceived her, not as someone superior offering intellectual charity, but as a true ally. When a young man asked how to dispute a wrong charge, Eleanor didn't just explain the steps. She wrote a sample letter on the board and offered tips on tone and how to construct a strong argument. "Education is the one kind of power no one can take away from you," she said as she concluded the session. "And knowing your rights is part of that education. Don't let anyone tell you this is too complicated for you to understand. If I could learn while cleaning offices and reading borrowed books, you can too." The audience broke into applause. Several people approached her afterward to ask specific questions, offer thanks, or simply talk. Arthur watched as Eleanor gave each person the same attention and respect, regardless of the size of their question. An elderly woman, Mrs. Conciso, held Eleanor's hands and said, "Sweetheart, you're an angel in our lives. Without you, I never would have solved that problem at the phone company. Mrs. Conciso, you solved it. I just showed you the way." When the crowd finally thinned out, Arthur stepped closer. "That was incredible. It was just a basic talk. No, it was so much more than that. They walked to the parking lot in silence, Arthur deep in thought. "Can I ask you something?" he finally said. "Of course." "How do you manage to be so important in people's lives without even realizing it?" Eleanor stopped walking. "Arthur, I'm not important. I'm just sharing what I know." "That's exactly it. You don't hold on to knowledge to have power over people. You use knowledge to give people power." He looked at her with a mix of admiration and something akin to sadness. "You're everything I wanted to be and never could." "What do you mean I spent my whole life collecting knowledge to stand out to be better than others? You use yours to lift people up. It's the complete opposite of everything I've built." Eleanor gently touched his arm. "Arthur, it's not too late to change how you use what you know. You think so, I'm sure of it." At that moment, Michael came running out of the community center, followed by Maria. "Mom, you are amazing," the boy shouted, throwing himself into Eleanor's arms. "Michael, this is Arthur. Arthur, my son Michael, and my mother Maria." Michael looked at Arthur with curious eyes. "You're the guy with the black car, the one who's always confused." Michael, Eleanor scolded, embarrassed. Arthur laughed. "Yeah, that's me, the confused one." Maria held out her hand with a warm smile. "Nice to meet you, Arthur. Eleanor talks a lot about you. I hope it's good things." "It is. She says you're very smart, but that you still need to learn how to trust your feelings more." Eleanor blushed. "Mom, what it's true." Maria turned to Arthur. "Can I give you a piece of advice, and please? My daughter's not complicated. She just won't accept being treated like a second choice. If you like her, be brave enough to admit it. If you don't, be honest enough to let her move on." Arthur nodded, touched by Maria's gentle honesty. "Thank you for the advice, Mrs. Maria. You're welcome, and now you're both having dinner with us. I made lasagna for an army, and I won't take no for an answer." Michael grabbed Arthur's hand. "Do you like lasagna? Grandma makes the best in the world." Arthur looked at Eleanor, who gave a little shrug and a smile. "Looks like your evening is all planned out. Looks like it." And for the first time in years, Arthur felt truly at home. Dinner at Maria's had changed everything, not just for Arthur and Eleanor, but in how they related to each other. In the weeks that followed, they went back to working together as naturally as before. But something had shifted. There was a new sense of honesty between them. Every conversation felt deeper. Every silence carried more meaning. Arthur began regularly volunteering at the community center, not as a guest, but as a dedicated participant. He discovered that teaching business contracts to small neighborhood entrepreneurs was more fulfilling than closing any multi-million-dollar deal. And Eleanor watched that transformation with a mix of pride and something she could finally admit to her self-love. The annual Sterling and Brooks event was scheduled for Friday. It was a firm tradition, an elegant evening where clients, partners, and employees gathered to celebrate the year's achievements. Arthur always delivered the main speech, a technical summary of the firm's wins and milestones. But this time would be different. That morning, he sought out Eleanor. "I need you to be there tonight. I always help organize the events." "Of course I'll be there." "No, I need you there as Eleanor, not as an employee." She looked at him puzzled. "What are you planning? Something I should have done a long time ago." That evening, the main hall of Sterling and Brooks had been transformed. Golden lights, elegant arrangements, soft music. About 200 people mingled, sipping cocktails and chatting. Eleanor arrived in a simple but elegant black dress she had bought just for the occasion. She carried a small clutch and a nervous smile. Michael was at home with Maria, having made his mother promise she'd tell him all about the party the next day. "You look beautiful," Arthur said when he saw her, and for the first time she didn't take it as a professional courtesy. "You look very sharp, too." He wore a perfect black tuxedo, but there was something different about his posture, less rigid, more human. During the cocktail hour, Eleanor chatted easily with clients and coworkers. Several recognized her as the viral cleaning lady, and she responded to their jokes with humor and grace. Arthur watched from a distance, noticing how she transformed every interaction into something real. Miss Albright, the firm's second-in-command, approached Eleanor. "Can I confess something? When I heard Arthur had promoted you, I was skeptical. I thought it was just a public relations move after the video went viral. And now I understand why he says you're the smartest person in the office and why he's been acting so different." "Different? How?" Eleanor asked. "More human, happier, more himself." When it was time for the speech, Arthur stepped onto the small stage at the front of the room. He tapped his glass gently to gain everyone's attention. "Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us once again." The room quieted, expecting the usual discourse about numbers and accomplishments. Every year, I come up here to talk about our wins, about the cases we've won, the clients we've gained, the goals we've surpassed, and every year, you politely listen as I go through statistics and thank everyone for the team effort. A few soft chuckles rippled through the room. This year is different because this year I learned something that completely changed how I see success. Arthur found Eleanor in the crowd. She stood near the sidewall holding a wine glass she'd barely touched. I learned that intelligence isn't about degrees, leadership isn't about hierarchy, and value isn't about price. Curious murmurs began to stir. You all know this has been the best year in our firm's history. 68 cases won $200 million in contracts, closed expansion into 3 new states. Impressive numbers. He paused, his eyes still locked on Eleanor. But none of that happened because I'm some kind of business genius. It happened because I met someone who taught me to see beyond the numbers. Someone who showed me that real law doesn't always happen in boardrooms with city views, but in community centers where everyday people learn about their rights. The room was now completely silent, everyone listening closely. This person taught me that knowledge is only power when it's shared, that intelligence only matters when it lifts others up, and that the greatest success isn't winning a $60 million case. It's helping a 70-year-old woman understand why she doesn't have to pay for a service she never signed up for. Arthur stepped off the stage and began walking toward Eleanor. People stepped aside, creating a clear path. Eleanor Vance taught me that intelligence doesn't wear a suit, that wisdom doesn't have a permanent address, and that love can't be bought, bargained, or controlled. Love is recognized, respected, and built. Every single day, he stopped in front of her. Eleanor's eyes were filled with tears. She clearly hadn't anticipated such a public declaration. That's why, in front of all of you, I want to make 2 proposals. Arthur turned slightly to include the audience, but his eyes remained fixed on Eleanor. First proposal, Eleanor, will you be my official partner? Not just an advisor, but a full partner at Sterling & Brooks, with a share of the profits, voting rights on major decisions, and responsibility for the social projects we want to start. The room fell completely silent. Eleanor nodded too, moved to speak. Second proposal, and this one is the most important, will you be my wife? This time the silence was broken by a few audible sighs from the audience. Eleanor looked around at the smiling, expectant faces, then turned back to Arthur. Are you sure? Because there's no going back from this. I'm more sure about this than any contract I've ever signed. She smiled, tears finally falling. I accept both proposals, but I need to set one condition. What is it? No expensive flowers to try to impress me. If you want to give me something special, I want a library. A real library with comfortable chairs and space for Michael to study. Arthur laughed, taking her hands. Deal. A library, chairs, and anything else you want. He kissed her, and this time there was nothing inappropriate or confusing about it. It was the right kiss at the right moment in front of the right people. The audience erupted in applause and cheers. Miss Albright was crying. Mr. Davison was smiling like he had just won an important case. Leo was already filming everything for social media. When they pulled apart, Arthur whispered in Eleanor's ear, "There's one more thing I want to propose. What is it? I think you should finish law school." Eleanor pulled back, slightly surprised. Arthur, I don't need a diploma too. It's not about needing it. It's about you deserving to have official recognition for what you already know. And because I want you to have every possible option. But what about the time, the work, Michael? We'll figure it all out. Your mother can help more with Michael. You can study whenever works best. And if you need to reduce your workload, we'll do it. What matters is that you finish what you started. Eleanor thought for a few seconds. Law school had been a dream cut short 6 years earlier. The idea of finally earning that degree had always felt too far away to be realistic. Do you really think I should? I think you should do what feels right, but I also think you deserve the choice. And if I agree, do you promise not to rush me or make it easier for me? I promise. You'll earn that degree the same way you've done everything in life, with hard work, intelligence, and determination. Eleanor smiled. Then I accept. I'll finish law school, even knowing it will be a lot working, studying, taking care of Michael. I've done harder things, and this time, I won't be doing it alone. Arthur kissed her again, and for the first time in years, Eleanor felt that all her dreams weren't just possible, they were inevitable. The following Monday, she was on the phone with the law school's office inquiring about the re-enrollment process. Maria had immediately offered to help more with Michael, saying it was time for her daughter to finish what she started properly. And for the first time, Eleanor realized that having a partner didn't mean depending on someone. It meant building a life together where both their dreams had room to grow. 6 months later, at the very same community center where Arthur had learned the true meaning of justice, the most unusual wedding Chicago had ever seen was taking place. The decorations didn't come from a fancy magazine. They were crafted by Maria's loving hands, who had organized a group of neighbors to transform the small auditorium into something magical. Flowers from Mrs. Rosa's garden fabrics, borrowed from the local seamstress lights, rigged up by neighborhood electricians. Every detail was imbued with history and care. The plastic chairs were adorned with colorful fabric ties. The altar was a simple table covered with a hand-embroidered cloth made by Michael's grandmother. Instead of an expensive catering service, there was a community table where every family brought a special dish. Arthur arrived early, adjusting the simple suit he had chosen so he wouldn't look out of place. He watched the final preparations with a smile that Miss Albright, his former employee and now friend, would later describe as if he had finally found his true place in the world. The guests were an unlikely mix. Lawyers from the firm sat next to cleaning staff. Wealthy clients chatted with retired neighbors. Law students laughed with children from the community. Leo, of course, was recording everything, knowing he was capturing what would undoubtedly become the most viral wedding video in American legal history. When the simple music began to play, a playlist Michael had helped curate, Arthur took his place at the makeshift altar. For the first time in years, his hands weren't shaking from nerves. He was exactly where he wanted to be. The door opened and Eleanor walked in arm with Michael. She wore a simple white dress purchased from a neighborhood store and tailored by the local seamstress. Her hair was down, adorned with a single fresh sunflower, which Michael had insisted upon, proclaiming, "My mom shines like the sun." Michael wore a little navy blue suit that made him look like a tiny lawyer. He carried a pillow with the rings, walking with a serious expression that made the entire crowd laugh through their tears. Arthur watched Eleanor walk toward him and finally understood the meaning of the word home. It wasn't a place, it was a person. It was this woman who had changed his entire life with wisdom, humor, and a kind of generosity he was still learning to match. When she reached the altar, Michael handed the rings to the efficient Professor Albright, the same man who had lent Eleanor her first legal books years ago. Before the traditional vows, Eleanor spoke, catching everyone by surprise. "I'd like to say a few words." She turned to the crowd, holding Arthur's hands. "For a long time, people knew me as the cleaning lady who knew the law, and that's fine. I really do clean things. But over the years, I realized I didn't just clean floors." Her voice was steady, full of quiet emotion. "I cleaned away judgments. My own judgments about what I could or couldn't achieve. Other people's judgments about what it means to be smart, successful, worthy." She looked at Arthur. "And I helped someone very special clean away his judgments too about what it means to lead to love and to be truly happy." Maria was quietly crying in the front row. Mrs. Rosa waved her handkerchief. Miss Albright and Mr. Davison exchanged emotional glances. When it was time to exchange rings, Michael walked solemnly up to Arthur and whispered something the microphone picked up. "Now you're our assistant too." "Okay." The crowd burst out laughing. Arthur knelt down to meet him eye to eye. "I accept the job, but can we talk about the salary?" "Sure, but I don't take money. Only ice cream and trips to the park." "Deal." They sealed the agreement with a formal handshake that made everyone laugh again. When they finally kissed as husband and wife, it was under a shower of flower petals brought in by the neighborhood children. The kiss was long, sweet, and filled with promises that didn't need a contract to be kept. As the party kicked off with music, homemade food, and stories spreading from table to table, Eleanor and Arthur stepped aside for a moment to take it all in. "Any regrets?" he asked, joking. "Marrying you, never. Doing it in a place where everyone's going to have opinions about our life. Still no. Why not? Because now they're our family, and family looks out for each other." Arthur kissed her again, knowing he had found not just a wife, but a whole new way to live. A life where intelligence was measured by how deeply you loved success, was measured by how much you helped others, and happiness was as simple as sharing ice cream with a 6-year-old boy who had just gained a stepfather willing to be his assistant. Thank you truly for staying with the story to the very end. If it touched you in some way, if it reminded you of someone a struggle, a truth you carry, please share how it made you feel. These are more than just stories. They're real lives, real hearts, real battles. A moving story, a true story, a story with a moral. Wherever you are in the world, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? Your support makes it possible to keep telling touching stories, family history, and personal overcoming, like this one. If this story resonated with you, consider giving it a like, subscribe, and join us again for more inspiring stories from people's lives. Until next time, stay kind, stay curious. I'll see you in the next story.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.